Hello and welcome. I'm Tafaraq Adamu. I'm Maha Shetty, one of the unsung heroes in the Ethiopian music business, passed away this week. Through his record label, Amaha Records, he produced over 100 singles and plenty of LPs back in the late 1960s and very early 1970s. His friend Charles Sutton, himself a musician, joins me to reflect on the life and works of this man. Charles Sutton, thank you very much for joining me here on Meet ETV.
Thank you, Tafarra, for having me. And needless to say, like everyone else, I'm very saddened by Amaha's passing, and it's a good to have this opportunity at this time to speak with you about him.
So in 1969, he was just 24 when he launched his record label, Amaha Records, and you were in Ethiopia as a Peace Corps volunteer.
I was a Peace Corps volunteer indeed at that time. And I did know of him by fame. As you will remember, I was involved with Orchestra Ethiopia and more in the traditional music field as opposed to the modern music field that Amaha was making his pioneering records of. But I did enjoy and love all kinds of Ethiopian music, and I was an avid listener. So I knew of his work back then, and I listened to his recordings, although I never had the opportunity at that time to meet him.
Yeah, but the first time met him, I guess, 15 years ago when you traveled to Ethiopia for a totally different function, right?
That's correct. I hadn't been back to Ethiopia for many years, and I went back when my Masenko teacher and dear friend Geta Messiah Baba became seriously ill with a brain tumor, and I went back. There was a fundraiser held for him at Agar Fakir, and I went back to participate in that and to whatever degree I could to help with the fundraising and the preparations for his treatment. And it was at that time I arrived, never having really needed a vehicle in Ethiopia before. And as you know, Ato Amaha was in the car rental business among many other. That was among his many other enterprises that were successor to his pioneering job or undertaking as a record producer. And so, a friend of mine advised me that I would do well to rent a car from Amaha if I needed a vehicle. And that's how our friendship began, because just as I remembered him, he remembered me from my work with the orchestra years before. And so we had on the occasion of my coming to get the vehicle he was providing for me, we sat in the car and we must have talked for 2 or 3 hours, just reminiscing and getting to know each other, because we knew of each other, but that was our first time in 2004 to meet in person.
You never crossed paths.
No, that's correct.
Yeah. So let me take you back to 1969, to the first production of an LP, right? That is of Alama Yoshete, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So what did you think of him back then? I mean, although you never met him personally, but he was the first Ethiopian to privately distribute those LPs, right? In light of what was put in place as an edict, imperial edict, banning private distribution of those records.
Yes.
That was quite a daring move, right?
Yes, I mean, it was a daring move, and I admired that. And you might say that Ato Tesfaye Lema, who is the director of Orchestra Ethiopia, as you know, at that time, I was the administrator. Amaha could be taken as a kind of an inspiration to us. We made this a record, which was recorded by the famous VOA recordist Leo Sarkeesian in the YMCA near Arat Kilo. And just as we were about to, we had received special permission in an audience with Emperor Haile Selassie to bring our record into Ethiopia tax-free, but that didn't stop Agar Fikr from sending us a notice, enjoining us from saying, just as you did about Amaha, that they had exclusive rights to all recordings and that we were forbidden to distribute our record, but we did anyway, and nothing came of it. Just as in the case of Amaha.
Yes, yeah. So, do you have a copy of his first album, of his first LP, of this Alamayo Shete piece?
I wish that I did. I don't have any of those early albums.
But you had the chance to listen to those pieces back then in 1969, right?
Well, they were played on the radio, and I was an avid radio listener at that time.
Yeah. And then, how well received was it back then?
Very well, according to my recollection.
Mm-hmm. So many years after you met, many years later, of course, you must have talked about that too, right?
We did.
With Amaha. He had this fun, when I met him first, when was it? Probably 10 plus years ago.
When I first met him was in 2004.
No, I met him 10 years ago, and I specifically asked him this question. He was really told me that was actually the turning point of his in his life as a music producer.
Yes, I can imagine that would be true.
And then in just 5 years, that's between 1969, I guess, to 1975, year after the Ethiopian Revolution, he published over 100 singles and dozens of LPs.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing.
Yes, they were among the greatest recordings, and of course, they were another thing that I have in common. I'm very proud of with Amaha is working with Francis Falsetto, and it was years later, starting in the 80s, that Francis sought out Amaha and began working in collaboration with him on the Great Ethiopic series, which, as Francis has often said, could never have existed without Amaha's work. And later on, in 2006, I collaborated with Francis and with Tesfaye Lemma on an Ethiopic release, Ethiopic 23 of Orchestra Ethiopia. And that was another thing that Amaha and I had in common. And Francis and Amaha and I became very close. And on occasions when Francis would be visiting Ethiopia for various reasons, we would always meet for lunch, usually at Dashan Tarara. It was through Amaha and Francis both that I got to learn a lot about Amaha's work back in the day.
Yeah. Francis was supposed to join us for this interview, but I think the connection issues. He now lives in southern France.
Yes.
There's a few connection issues. I'll try to get him on if I can, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but we'll see. So,
I hope so.
Yeah. So, Francis Falsetto, for his Ethiopic series, I mean, he banked heavily on Amaha Ishete's labels, right? I mean, albums, right?
Very much so.
In other words, had it not been for Amaha Ishete, the Ethiopic series wouldn't have existed. Is that correct?
That's what Francis says, and I can believe it.
Yeah, that's what he actually told me over email when I tried to invite him for this interview. So how was he as a friend? I mean, when you met him, he's already abandoned, it's a long time ago, abandoned his music business. He was into other business. I mean, definitely, he said he was into car rental business too, right?
That's right. He was a great entrepreneur. He was a great businessman. And but he was an extremely kind and considerate person, and he kind of took an interest in me and in all the things that I was doing that had to do with Ethiopian culture and music. And for one thing I remember was that after Geta Masai had his successful operation in India, he traveled back and forth a couple of times or even more here to the United States, and Amaha would always arrange at no expense for his transportation to and from the airport. And he had such great respect and reverence for Geta Masai. That's one thing I'll never forget. The same for Tesfaye Lama, and I remember when Tesfaye was alive, I used to frequently go and visit him at the nursing home where he lived in Washington, and Amaha asked me for his email address, and he corresponded with him. And I remember seeing some of the emails that he wrote to him, encouraging him, because they were by that time Tesfaye was also not able to walk, and I think for a while this was kind of very depressing to him, as is understandable, and I think it was a great deal due to Amaha's encouragement that he followed his example, and in spite of his disability and his illness, he went on to write the Ethiopian Musika Tarik, the history of Ethiopian music, during the last 5 years of his life in the nursing home, and just lived to see it published. And Amaha encouraged him very much in that undertaking.
Interesting. I read that book, and it was quite a very daring attempt. Amaha Sheti also suffered from some rare health condition.
Yes, he did.
That was a bit difficult for him to walk, right?
Yeah, he couldn't really walk at all. He had to walk being supported on either side by somebody, but he was it's hard to explain. He made you feel as if this malady didn't even exist. It was just something that he went on living his life and doing everything he wanted to do, in spite of this, and he didn't make you feel conscious of it at all. He bore up under it wonderfully. It was very admirable, really a wonderful example that he set for anyone who's afflicted like that. And that's one thing about him I'll never forget.
Although you never met him in the U.S. while he was in the U.S. in exile, that would have been between 1975 and to the mid 1990s. He tried to peripherally engage, if you will, himself in music, right, by organizing concerts and stuff like that.
He did, and he had a nightclub in Washington that was very famous. And as if I had a chance, I would have loved to meet him then. But I did know about his nightclub, and I think I went there once, long time ago, back in the 80s.
Yeah. Amaha was basically a forerunner in the music publishing business in Ethiopia, producing all these sheklas, LPs, and vinyl records, and I think at least he was 2 years ahead of Philips which joined the business and then of course years later Ali Tango.
Right.
So these are the prominent names. So that he led by example. He was a forerunner in the business, correct?
Exactly. Yes. Very true.
Very true. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think will he be remembered for?
I imagine that he'll be remembered by most people for that pioneering and daring effort that he made, which was very successful. Um, and but I think he'll be remembered by his friends and his loved ones as a very kind and caring man, um, and uh, somebody who was very thoughtful. I know that I could never leave when I would visit Ethiopia. I couldn't leave without his giving me a gift for myself and my wife, and he gave me many nice things. Paintings. He gave me some Ethiopian musical instruments. He gave me a beautiful gabi that I still wear, and he's just such a thoughtful person.
Well, I guess we have to end the conversation on that note. Thank you very much indeed, Charles Sutton, for joining me on the show from your home in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tafarra. The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about my dear friend Amaha.